Weekend in store with wet and breezy weather, followed by showers later Sunday and into Monday.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Hi, I'm Dan Wootton. You can watch me live on GB News Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. And did you know that you can also watch and listen live on our website, gbnews.com. You'll always be up to date on the latest breaking news, as well as enjoying the best stories, opinions and shows. You can even join the debate under our live player as you're watching. So head straight to gbnews.com on TV, radio and online. GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
It is 6 p.m. That means it's time for Dewbs & Co. But with me, Emily Carver. Thank you very much indeed for your company. So we've just had the breaking news that the boss of NatWest, that's the owner of Coutts Bank, Dame Alison Rose, has officially apologised to Nigel Farage over his account closure. Specifically, she said she was sorry for the deeply inappropriate comments made in the published papers that we've seen. So a massive win for Nigel Farage, a huge PR disaster for Coutts, NatWest and the CEO herself, himself, who took home £5.2 million last year. Is this apology enough? We'll be getting the very latest on that. Then, in a statement jointly signed with Argentina and other Latin American countries, the EU referred to the Falkland Islands as Islas Malvinas. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak says this is a regrettable choice of words, but is it actually a dangerously provocative one? Then, have Just Stop Oil met their match? Counter-protesters have taken matters into their own hands, encircling activists and preventing them from disrupting rush hour traffic. Are ordinary people fighting back? And what do you think? Are businesses using the war in Ukraine as an excuse to rip us off? That's what Asda has been accused of, particularly overcharging people when it comes to fuel. We've got all of that to come tonight. Let me know what you think about this apology to Nigel Farage. We've got all that to come on Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. But first, let's get the news headlines.
Thank you very much, Emily. I'm Rory Smith in the GB newsroom. Well, as you've been hearing, the group CEO of NatWest, which includes Coutts, has apologised to Nigel Farage after his account was closed. Dame Alison Rose apologises for what she calls deeply inappropriate comments made about Mr Farage in the now published papers. She continued saying it is not the company's policy to drop a customer on the basis of legally and held political and personal views. A full review of Coutts' processes and how these decisions are made will be carried out. Well, it comes as the Treasury announces that UK banks will be subject to stricter rules over closing customers' accounts to protect freedom of expression. The illegal migration bill has become law. It will prevent people from claiming asylum in the UK if they arrive through unauthorised means. The government also hopes the changes will ensure detained people are removed either to their home country or to a third country. The Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, says the focus is now on appealing to the Supreme Court to make Rwanda one of the countries people can be sent to. Strikes by health workers could end up costing hospitals billions of pounds. That's according to Matthew Taylor, the head of the body that represents NHS organisations. He says they're on red alert for the next 48 hours as senior doctors walk out over pay. He says health leaders are deeply concerned by the impact that strikes are having. But Health Secretary Steve Barclay says they have listened to the BMA's demands.
Average NHS earnings of a consultant after this pay rise will be £134,000 a year. And on top of that, 20% of their salary goes into their pension, which means they'll be able to earn, when they retire by the age of 65, tax-free up to £60,000 a year. The number one ask of the BMA was for pension tax reform, and we listened to that ask, we acted on it, and in addition we've also accepted in full the independent pay review body recommendations.
Up to 20,000 rail staff are on strike over job security and pay, causing disruption and cancellations across many services. It's the first of 3 days of industrial action affecting 14 train companies in England, which may have a knock-on effect into Scotland and Wales. Members are also walking out on the 22nd and 29th of July. RMT General Secretary Mick Lynch is hopeful that fresh talks will reflect the progress he's making with London Underground.
Let's try and get a deal cooked up that we can try and get back around the table. We're doing that with London Transport right now about what's going on London Underground. We've been in ACAS, the conciliation service, all week. So if we can get the same atmosphere where people are trying to work towards some solutions, perhaps we can do that on National Rail. I'm hoping that maybe London Underground will come up with some proposals that are steps forward, and we can consider that. But if we can do that on both parts of the railway, if you like, we can maybe get some progress.
Mortgage rates have fallen for the first time since May. Both 2- and 5-year fixed-rate deals are down 0.02% on average. That's according to financial information company Moneyfacts. But those figures are still higher than their peaks during last year's mini-budget. Supermarkets are not displaying prices as clearly as they should be, preventing shoppers from finding the best deals. The Competition and Markets Authority has found retailers could be hampering people's ability to compare products. The watchdog is warning supermarkets to make the necessary changes or risk facing enforcement action. It's calling on the government to tighten the law around pricing display. Voting continues in the 3 by-elections taking place in England today. All 3 seats in Uxbridge and South Ruislip, Selby and Ainsty and Somerton and Frome have been held by the Conservatives since the last general election in 2019. Polling stations close tonight at 10 o'clock and constituents are being reminded to bring with them photo ID. 5 whale sharks have been rescued after becoming trapped in fishing nets in ocean waters off Indonesia and Papua New Guinea. Underwater footage shows the divers cutting and pulling away at the so-called ghost nets and gently freeing the whale sharks. Well, every year, millions of marine animals are either killed or injured due to the discarded fishing nets. The whale shark is the largest species of fish and is on the red list of vulnerable species. TV, online, DAB+ radio and on TuneIn. This is GB News. Now, though, back to Emily.
Welcome to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. So joining me this evening until 7 is my panel, Conservative live peer in the House of Lords, Daniel Moylan, and the contributing editor at Novara Media, Michael Walker. As ever, please do get in touch with us about all of the topics we're going to be discussing, including that apology to Nigel Farage. GBviews at gbnews.com or on Twitter at gbnews. Your views are already flooding in on that breaking news, but let's tell you about it in more detail. The CEO of NatWest has apologised to Nigel Farage for closing down his bank account. Let's have a look at what she said. So, Alison Rose, the chief executive, said in a letter, "I am writing to apologise for deeply inappropriate comments about yourself made in the now published papers for the Wealth Committee. I would like to make it clear that they do not reflect the view of the bank. I believe very strongly that freedom of expression and access to banking are fundamental to our society, and it is absolutely not our policy to exit a customer on the basis of legally held political and personal views. The bank has now offered alternative banking arrangements at NatWest." So there's quite a lot to go at here, but Daniel, let's bring you in to begin with. What is your reaction to this letter?
I think this makes it worse. Actually, it's not really an apology. It doesn't restore the situation. He's not being offered his account back. It says that these are the views of the bank, but they don't reflect the views of the bank. But she hasn't said what action is being taken to put that right, what action is being taken to train, if nothing else, the staff who got it so badly wrong. And she is hinting and pretending towards the end that it's because Nigel Farage was a politically exposed person under the money laundering regulations, which of course he wasn't, because that status ceases 12 months after you hold a political office, and it's at least 2 years, isn't it, since he was an MEP. He hasn't held a political office since. So the whole letter, in my view, it really just does show that Alison Rose, Dame Alison, is either very badly advised or she doesn't understand how bad this looks. This is not over for her. She hasn't also mentioned how confidential information about his account, about his status with the bank, appears to have reached the BBC.
Well, that's a key point, isn't it? And there is a question about whether the BBC should issue an apology to Nigel Farage over their false reporting. Well, what came to light, they reported that it was because that his bank account was closed because he didn't have sufficient funds. We now know from the published papers that it was due to his values not aligning with that of Coutts. Michael, what's your reaction to this? Do you think this apology is enough?
Well, I mean, the government have said they're going to introduce some regulations which mean that people will have to get an explanation if they get their account cut, and they will have some recourse to appeal. That seems sensible to me. I'm not really sure what people want from Alison Rose. They want to sort of get on her knees and grovel for forgiveness.
Well, I mean, she took home £5.2 million last year. You would have thought that she'd be a bit more across what some of her staff are doing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not here to defend multi-millionaire bankers,
No.
I suppose. And I do think this has raised worrying... I think this is a worrying situation. I mean, I would say that it isn't just something that happens to right-wingers. So Palestine solidarity organisations, for example, are constantly really struggling to open bank accounts because you have exactly the same situation where bankers say, oh, they might be a bit too controversial to bank with us, let's just let them bank with someone else. And if they all say that, you end up being denied what is pretty much a basic right, which is to have a bank account.
Yeah, it is quite extraordinary how they came to close Nigel Farage's bank account and how they appear to have briefed the BBC in a completely different direction, covering their backs. What do you think this says about the state of these types of corporations in our country? They say very clearly that they have these values. This woman who heads up NatWest, which is the owner of Coutts Bank, talks about how the bank is active in the battle against climate change, that they are prominent in LGBTQ rights. They have all of this, what one could call woke projects going on, and they want to be seen as a force for good in the world. Do you think that's woke washing, Daniel?
I don't know what woke washing is. Okay, let me start by agreeing with Michael. This is not just a problem for Nigel Farage or right-wingers. It's a problem for all sorts of organisations, including left-wing organisations and commercial organisations, legitimate companies engaged in things that aren't sufficiently woke to meet the criteria of the banks. And it's got to have a stop put to it. Woke washing, I mean, the truth is, I don't know what they're doing. I think they somehow, especially in our larger corporations, they've been gripped with the idea that their job is to peddle a political message rather than to offer better customer services, improve the profit margins of their businesses, keep branches open in the case of banks, or have any real community sense, which a branch closing programme is not consistent with. So I don't know where they think they've got this from or why they think they're entitled to use companies that have been built up over so many years as a platform for doing this.
It is quite incredible because all of these banks, they sign up to diversity and inclusion and they talk about how their work practices are inclusive and they like diversity and all these good things that sound very nice. But clearly, from this case and from others that we've seen, they're not very inclusive to those they happen to agree with or don't fit in with, you know, whatever the trendy opinion is right now. We saw in the published papers that they were quoting Brexit. There were references to racist and xenophobic. There were races to hoaxes around Russia and all of this stuff that could be seen as controversial. I worry, and I think a lot of people at home worry, that it's not just about Coutts, it's not just about NatWest, but could it be that businesses up and down this country are taking decisions like this about their customer base?
I mean, it could be, and that's why we shouldn't have unrestrained corporate power and why you want proper government regulations in these sectors and these industries. I suppose there is a danger of throwing the baby out with the bathwater because lots of these policies will have, you know, inclusion policies, and that's principally for the workers. So it's a large organisation, they've got lots of employees. It will be the case that I'm sure these organisations have policies about the inclusion of LGBT people or people from ethnic minorities.
Is it about that, or is it more about PR?
Well, it's probably a bit of both. I mean, you'd have to speak to the people that work for the industries. But I wouldn't say that this Nigel Farage story isn't a reason to say no company should have policies to try and end discrimination in the workplace. Now, the problem here isn't so much, I think, that Coutts has sort of taken a political position. It's more that they have, I think, contravened someone's rights, really, which is to have a bank account. I mean, Coutts obviously is a very specific type of bank account for very high-value individuals, so potentially it's slightly different to if you were just with Nationwide or HSBC or whatever. But I do think that is an issue. The other thing I would probably say we should be wary about is any idea that banks making ethical decisions about investments is necessarily bad. Now, what you have at the moment is you've got some banks who, because of campaigning from environmental groups, have said, we don't want to invest in new fossil fuel extraction, for example. I think that's important. I mean, they can easily say that's actually because of commercial decisions, because if regulations change in the future, then that could be a stranded asset. So basically what I'm saying, something wrong has happened here, regulation is needed, but the idea that banks should only, and any company should only try to maximise their profits, I think would be a mistake as well.
I don't think I've said that, but the fact is we also expect banks and other companies to obey the law. And it is the law that you have to observe the Equality Act, whether you like it or not, but it is the law. So they have to be inclusive in their policies and their employment policies, and not discriminate against people who have protected characteristics under the Equality Act. And I'd expect that of NatWest. I'm not saying they shouldn't do that. They should be doing it because they're required to by law. What we're doing here is going way beyond that and actually promoting campaigns that are strayed right into the political area. And they're doing this partly, they say, because they can attract young people to work for them that way. But I think they're deluding young people, because any young people brought into the workplace today who are told your company is going to survive because you've taken a stand on transphobia or whatever, well, is being misled. The company will survive if it is commercially viable, and that does, I'm afraid, mean making profits by satisfying your customers.
Yes, I think it is quite interesting how businesses try to entice young people with all of this stuff, but really, a business exists to make a profit and employ people while doing so, and that is a good. That is a societal good. That is the good. But it's quite interesting, Daniel, in terms of whether Coutts has broken the sort of fair treatment of customers rules that the FCA sets out.
They've just arrived, those rules. They're brand new.
In terms of consumers are to be confident they are dealing with firms where the fair treatment of customers is central to the corporate culture. Clearly, Farage does not think he was treated fairly. There are many of these. Consumers are provided with clear information, are kept appropriately informed before, during and after the point of sale. Again, Farage believes he was not treated fairly. This bank could be in real trouble.
I think there are important regulatory issues. The trouble is that the Financial Conduct Authority is, in my view, a pretty useless regulator. Even though the City Minister, Andrew Griffiths, has written to them now, again, I think he wrote, maybe it was a different minister, has written to them saying, you need to look at this and pull your socks up. They've been asked to do a review. It's in law now that they have to do a review of how politically exposed persons are dealt with, which, as I say, doesn't cover Nigel Farage, whatever Alison Rose tries to say. And she says she welcomes that review. But the fact is that this is happening, this sort of thing is happening to politicians, judges, diplomats and their families throughout the country, and they're quietly putting up with it. And we really, in a sense, should be grateful to Nigel Farage for exploding the whole issue and getting this coverage, because it's not just him, it's ordinary, decent people with no particular money, pensioners, you know, sons and daughters of politicians who are having accounts closed, having credit cards taken away from them, because these rules are being misapplied, overzealously applied by banks who have in many cases outsourced them to agencies who are basically paid to close the accounts down.
Yeah, absolutely right. And Annette's just written in, Michael, she says, the apology from Alison Rose is not enough. I worked for a bank for many years. Had I disclosed confidential information about a customer's account, I would have been instantly dismissed. She should go. I believe this refers to the, well, rumour, perhaps, that she herself may have briefed a BBC journalist at a charity dinner at one of these very cosy events and said, oh, no, the reason we closed Nigel Farage's account is simply because, you know, the finances weren't up to scratch. Later, we find out, well, that's not exactly the case at all. Do you think this highlights, again, just how cosy some of our media is with the likes of big bank bosses?
Yeah, I mean, we've known that for a long time. I think also this is an example of journalists shouldn't just take people at their word. Now, I think when this story first broke, I was very much of the opinion that people shouldn't take Nigel Farage at his word in that video. I still don't think we should. We should wait for the evidence to come out. I think what happened with the BBC is it seems like they took the word of someone. I don't want to sort of imply who told the BBC, but whoever told the BBC that this was purely because his money had fallen below the financial threshold, that was misleading and probably was confidential information. So I would imagine that they need to do something about that. I suppose going back to the previous point...
It's not mentioned in the letter.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think going back to the previous point about this in part being because banks want to employ young graduates, I think that is true, but I don't think that should be dismissed. It seems like you both are saying they shouldn't bother trying to please their new staff, their young graduates.
I just think it's totally phony. It's like I sign up to a business. Oh, great, what do I get? I get a bit of unconscious bias training. I get, you know, I feel good about myself because we celebrate Pride in the canteen. OK, the company says that they're, you know, investing in these sustainable projects, but really what they care about is their bottom line. I mean, there are fantastic businesses that do have a lot of value to the world in terms of sustainability, or whether it's green technology or whatever. But it's a lot of the time it's surface deep with these corporations, is it not?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think absolutely they're just there to get their bottom line, essentially. But it's interesting what pressures they have to respond to. So I think what you will see in our society at the moment is the people who have the most disposable income tend to be much older. The people who companies really want to employ tend to be much younger. So what you will see is older people try and use their consumer power to change the practices of corporations, and younger people use their power as workers to try and change the practices of corporations. Now, that to me seems perfectly natural, and we shouldn't be legislating or judging too harshly any organisation which responds to either of those pressures.
So, what do you think Nigel should do next? He's on at 7 o'clock, for those watching at home. What does he do next?
I wouldn't advise him what to do.
He knows what to do.
But I think my personal view is he should hold out for a restoration of his accounts. And that's not, it seems to me, to be being offered to him. And the letter is ambivalent because I understand, only from what he says, that he had both personal and business accounts, and that the offer of a NatWest account was only for personal use. Now, I don't know what this letter means. I don't know the facts behind that. But I think he needs to be arguing to get back to where he was before, and the bank owes him that.
Yes, it's quite incredible that they just say, oh, we're going to keep our offer of an alternative account with NatWest. Well, that wasn't the product he originally had and has been banking with for many, many years. Well, thank you very much indeed to you both. Now, moving on, Just Stop Oil were met with a peaceful counter-protest today, but are they becoming a danger to themselves? We'll get stuck into that.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
When the news happens, it happens here.
And really important breaking news.
Breaking news this morning.
On TV, radio and online, the news starts here on Britain's Newsroom.
All the biggest stories and the answers that you need from across the UK and beyond.
Join Britain's Newsroom from 9:30 on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different. Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. Keeping me company still until 7 o'clock is Conservative life peer in the House of Lords, Daniel Moylan, and contributing editor at Novara Media, Michael Walker. Thank you very much indeed. Now, we're getting a huge reaction in the inbox to that apology from Dame Alison Rose to Nigel Farage. She is, of course, the CEO of NatWest, which owns Coutts Bank, which is the one. This is all over the closure of Nigel Farage's bank account, of course. Now, one thing that's been, what someone's asked me is, Sir Starmer has failed to comment on the Coutts debacle. I don't think that has been very British, says Andy. Yes, Keir Starmer's been a little quiet on all this. Why do you think that? Why do you think he might be
Yeah, I have to say I'm quite confused about it because, Keir Starmer tends to follow public opinion. And I don't think public opinion is going to be particularly on the side of a bank cancelling someone's bank account. I don't want to say it's 100% because of his views, because it seems like there were a number of reasons. But if his political views did play a part in the decision, which does seem to be the case, then it does seem to be worrying. If I was Keir Starmer, I would be using the opportunity to talk about why we shouldn't have unrestrained corporate power, why it is important to have laws to protect consumers from the decisions made in boardrooms.
He's just so afraid, isn't he, of taking a stance on anything that could be considered controversial. He's flip-flopped so much over,
That's not right. I mean, he takes different stances on things that are controversial every few months. I think the main problem is he's got nothing to say. He's got nothing to say because, he's waiting for a focus group to come in and tell him what to say. And that will change every few months, and his opinions change every few months.
Well, quite. And Pamela's written in. She says, congratulations, Nigel. I do believe, however, that Dame Alison Rose needs to go much further. But well done so far. You are the people's champion. A lot of people do see this as a win for the British people, not just Nigel Farage.
I think there are two things, aren't there? The first is that people do realise that this is not like being told you can't use Asda. Where you can, of course, still buy food. If you are told by a bank you can't operate, you can't have an account, and we have to forget, it's not just Coots, he hasn't been able to get a bank account with several other banks either, then you become a non-person. And it's absolutely crucial. It's quite a frightening thought. You think about it for a moment. It's quite a frightening thought. And he's made a lot of people think about it, and that's why they're on his side. It's not just about being Nigel Farage. They've thought about it as their own experience. Now, at the same time, we have to say there are a lot of poor people in this country who can't get bank accounts, and we aren't always doing enough for them, and the banks don't do enough for them either. And you just have to think about the circumstances of not having a bank account, not being able to make electronic payments, not being able to use a debit card, and how serious they are, and it's brought this home to people.
Yes, exactly that. And we are likely to see new rules implemented which will force banks to explain why they have closed your account, which I think should be standard, really, don't you? But we will come back to this. But let's move on, because there is lots of other news, isn't there? Now, there's a little bit of controversy this morning. The European Union has allowed the use of the name Islas Malvinas, I think I pronounced that right, in official documents due to pressure from Argentina. The Falklands is, of course, an overseas British territory, and its citizens are British subjects. So should the EU be sticking their oar into UK business? Are the EU being vindictive, or is this just diplomacy? Michael, I'll come to you. What do you make of this story? Because to me, it seems quite obvious that this was a silly thing to do, could be provocative, could even be dangerous to be using this name, the Argentinian name, for the Falkland Islands.
And potentially, I mean, Britain will obviously oppose it. I suppose the question is, why is this happening right now? And the reason it's happening right now is because they want to sign some kind of deal with Argentina, and they don't particularly have to take into account Britain's views anymore because we're no longer a member of the bloc. Of course, any EU member state is going to have the backing of EU negotiators when it goes to any meeting such as this. The EU have decided here that it's in their self-interest. I think this is purely in their self-interest. I don't think it's them sticking up two fingers at us. I think they think that they can get better relations with Argentina if they say Falklands / Malvinas, which I think is the wording which was in the document. But I think it's perfectly legitimate for the British side to dispute that.
Daniel, purposefully provocative from the European Union?
No, I think carelessly provocative. I think, like so much that they do, they don't know what they're doing half the time. But I do think there's a bigger question here, which is how they see Great Britain, the United Kingdom. And the interesting thing about the European Union is they have profound difficulties in developing friendly relations with any other countries. They have a sort of Chinese empire relationship with their near neighbours, who are held in a sort of tributary relationship to them. Switzerland is a good example. And if Switzerland misbehaves, they come in and close their stock exchange down and things like that, or they stop giving them access to the stock exchange. They can't apparently have friendly or close relations with any other country. You might think they could have friendly relations with the United States, because after all, it's a long way away. But just see what's happened. The Commission tried to hire this American Economist only in the last week, and the French and others exploded about it. You can't have an American. There's a deep anti-American streak in Brussels as well. In fact, they're sort of anti-everybody. And they've got to grow up and realise that if you're going to be a diplomatic player internationally and get your own way, you need to be friends with people who have got basically similar values to yours, even if they have left you. And Britain is quite a significant power in Europe, and we should be able to have friendly and equal relationships with them. It's obvious that Sunak has tried to do that. I personally think he has failed. We haven't got any reciprocity at all from the European Union. And at time, perhaps, we should say, well, we'll stand aloof until you realise how much we actually do for you, how much of your continent we're actually defending, how much our Air Force and our soldiers are actually defending on the ground and in the air your eastern border. And maybe then you can come to... But at the moment, they have this real psychological problem. They can't have equal relations with anybody.
Well, and also, I think that this is quite a dangerous move from the European Union, because we know that the president of Argentina is very much keen to use the Falkland Islands in order to bolster his support in the country. We know that most Argentinians would love to recapture the Falkland Islands, despite the fact that the vast majority of people who live in the Falkland Islands want it to remain as it is, a British overseas territory. Do you not think it's a quite haphazard and clumsy from the European Union? And they do this quite a lot.
I mean, you can say it's clumsy. I mean, I wouldn't overstate the...
It's our territory, Michael.
I wouldn't overstate to the extent that this is going to have any particular practical ramifications.
I don't know, because...
I think the first Falklands War, one of the reasons it happened is because Argentina didn't quite know if we were so committed to the Falklands to defend it. I think now they probably guess that invading it again wouldn't be such a good idea. So to me, this is probably about domestic politics in Argentina, where the president wants to say, look, we've had a diplomatic achievement here because the EU has called this the Falklands and Malvinas. Now, I can see why that might seem a snub to the UK. I don't think it's taking us on the path to a Falklands War too.
So you don't think the EU could use this as its first step to saying, you know what, these islands need to go back to Argentina, or need to go to Argentina?
Can we just remember why the Falkland Islands are British? Not historically, but today. And the same is true of Gibraltar, and for that matter of Northern Ireland. It's because the majority of the population in all three territories want to maintain that relationship as it is. And in all three cases, if they decided that they wanted to be some part of some other country, it's almost certain that Britain would give way, and that actually is written into an international treaty in relation to Northern Ireland, not in the other two cases. But if they wanted, if the Gibraltarians said, we want to be part of Spain, we would not be staying there. We are there to defend democracy, not because of some historical claim. That's the reason we're there. And people need, the people who are playing with these territories need to realise it's not a game, it's about fundamental principles, democracy and choice and self-determination for territories that want to choose their own path.
I pretty much agree. I think the only thing that the UK could do that would be potentially provocative is to use those citizens on the Falklands as an excuse to extract oil from the surrounding area. I can see why Argentina might be a little bit annoyed if we
Depends
went
whose territorial waters it's in. They're a long way from Argentina.
Well, on that note, let me know what you think. Do you think the EU is being a bit vindictive here, or are they just being clumsy, as Michael suggests? Now, the Competition and Markets Authority has said Asda, the supermarket, has taken advantage of the Ukraine war to raise prices. Is it war profiteering or just the free market at work? Let me know.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers. Proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry, here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. A lucky few of us have managed to see some sunny spells throughout today, but there are still a few showers lingering on into the evening and into Friday as well, particularly for parts of Northern Ireland through Scotland as well. Also a few just clearing their way off the far southeast of England as well. In between that, we will start to see some clearer spells developing, and that will allow those temperatures to just slide off into single figures for particularly rural areas, particularly for parts of central Scotland. We could see close to 4 degrees Celsius. So a bit of a chill in the air first thing on Friday morning. That will allow for some sunshine, but there's also going to be the central area from Northern Ireland, southern Scotland down into northern England, where it is rather cloudy from the word go, and that cloud will continue to push its way across the rest of England and Wales throughout the day. The risk of some scattered showers in there as well. More prolonged rain for parts of Northern Ireland. Underneath all that cloud, though, it is going to be a relatively cool day. Temperatures between 16 and 22 degrees Celsius. Into the weekend, something more widely unsettled will be developing as these frontal systems start pushing their way in from the Atlantic. Those isobars also squeezing together across the southern half of the UK, particularly southern coast of England. We'll see some very strong winds, coastal gales, perhaps possible later on Saturday. This accompanied by outbreaks of rain for the vast majority of us. The far north of Scotland getting away with the sunniest and driest start to the weekend, but there'll be further outbreaks of rain and showers as we head into Sunday and the start of next week as well. Bye-bye.
That warm feeling inside. From Boxed Boilers, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Dewbs & Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons? I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In a world of dull and predictable radio and TV shows.
Oh, hi. On Mark Dolan tonight, we've got big guests. We drill into the big stories of the day. The show adds up to a brilliant listening and viewing experience. Mark Dolan Tonight is the most entertaining current affairs show ever, and that's a fact. That's Mark Dolan Tonight, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 9. Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Like all families, we have arguments every now and then, but actually we agree on what the mission of GB News is, and that's the most fundamentally important thing.
GB News provides the kind of platform that lets all voices be heard. We don't hold back. We're free to say what we really think.
Just because some people who live in a tiny little Westminster bubble think that their particular story is important, that's not the most important story for me.
And often there will be difficult stories, stories that you won't find on the establishment media.
Because what people think in the north of England may be very different to what they're thinking in the home counties.
We're going to carry on telling the world what life is really like for households up and down the UK.
We love to be in your car, in your kitchen as you're having your breakfast. Whatever you're doing, you are part of the show. If it matters to you, it matters to us.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. With me until 7 is Conservative Life peer in the House of Lords, Daniel Moylan, and contributing editor at Novara Media, Michael Walker. There he is. Thank you very much indeed at home for getting in touch. You've been, well, writing to me non-stop, particularly about Nigel Farage and that apology from the CEO of NatWest, which we were not particularly impressed by on this panel, I don't think. But let me just go to some of your comments. Stephen says, the actions by Coutts has highlighted an extremely important and dangerous future that we're all blindly heading into. How does anyone manage to live without a bank account, from having wages and salaries paid into to paying for everyday life expenses like council rates, car tax and many other expenses? Yes, we are finding out just how much power some of these big banks do have to exert. Jeg says the bank should be doing exactly what it says on the tin. Banking, end of. Inclusivity these days is anything but inclusive. The banks certainly weren't interested in people's political views or anything else when it came to bailing them out. They just took everyone's money. They managed to be 100% inclusive then, regardless of your views. Thank you very much indeed, Jay. That was a very strong email indeed. And just quickly on the Falklands, Thomas says, the EU's comment regarding the Falklands, was it clumsy? Yes, probably. Was it provocative? Yes, definitely. Very good indeed. So moving on. The Competition and Markets Authority gave evidence in Parliament yesterday. They said that Asda took advantage of the war in Ukraine and bumped up fuel prices. Is this just the free market at work, or is there an element of war profiteering going on? I'll come to you, Michael, first. You're probably sceptical of some of these big businesses and, you know, do you buy the view that there's been a bit of greed inflation?
I agree with the IMF here. They think that 50% of inflation in the EU and Europe generally has been because of increased profit. So what we hear...
Do they really?
Yeah, they do. So what we hear from the government all the time is that the reason we can't give public sector workers, a decent pay rise, and why workers have to show restraint. That was the message from the Governor of the Bank of England last year. They say we can't possibly do that. You need to show restraint because otherwise what we're going to see is much higher rates of inflation. Now, what the statistics are showing, what the evidence is showing, is that actually the problem here is that corporations are taking too high profits. Now, in part, this is because their prices initially rise because of increased costs. So it seems to be the case here with Asda that what happened is the cost of fuel did increase in price, so they did have to increase prices, you could say. But then when the oil price came down, they didn't lower them again. And what that means is that they then get to profit off the difference between the cost they're purchasing the oil for and what they're selling it for.
To be fair to those selling petrol and fuel, did they not take massive losses during the pandemic when people weren't using as much fuel, there wasn't as much need for it, and so they need to, you know, make more profit now? There's no argument to that?
Well, I mean, corporations got a lot of support from the government over the course of the pandemic, so I think to say now they can price gouge due to a war would probably be a bit of a mistake. I mean, there's two ways the government can respond to this. One is to sort of make sure that these companies aren't price gouging. They seem to have a lot of things to say when it comes to workers demanding pay rises. They got a lot less to say when it comes to companies who are profit gouging, which has just as big an effect on inflation, and I would argue, as the IMF does, a bigger effect on inflation. So they should get involved. The other thing you could do is a windfall tax and redistribute that money another way.
Well, I don't approve of windfall taxes, but Daniel, the CMA found that supermarket profits at Asda, when it came to fuel sales, were up considerably. The margin was 4.6p per litre in 2019. That rose to 10.8p per litre in 2022. That means motorists may have overpaid by £900 million. That's the sum that they've done. I don't know how accurate that is. What do you say to that?
Well, over £1 per litre is taken by the government in tax already. So, I mean, if you want to affect prices at the pump, you could start there. I think the people really harmed by this inquiry is the Competition and Markets Authority, because it's not their job in a competitive market to go around and tell companies what they can charge when there is competition. And as far as I'm aware, there's reasonable competition in the market for petrol and diesel. So if you don't like the prices at Asda, you can go somewhere else. If you're on the service station, on the motorway, you can usually see the prices before you get to the service station. It's the same if you're driving in the street. They're outside. You can see them. And if you don't like the price, you can go somewhere else. And to come in on one particular company and say they're charging too much is not meant to be the job of the Competition and Markets Authority. Their job is meant to be if they think there's collusion, if there's a market being rigged, and then they should come down like a ton of bricks. But they're not claiming that here. They're just focusing on one company when you had real choice.
Well, there seems to be a difference in the way that they have, assessed supermarkets in terms of food and other things that they sell. This seems to be a problem that they've only highlighted when it comes to fuel. But a lot of people writing in...
They've repeatedly found that the supermarket sector is competitive.
A lot of people writing in do feel, though, that a lot of companies have been ripping them off. We see this constantly with our direct debits. Does everything have to go up at the rate it has, be it from your mobile phone contract to your, obviously, energy, but that's a specific example. But everything, it seems, is going up. Are you sure that not some of that is due to a bit of greed?
The great evil here is inflation, and the Bank of England allowed inflation to get out of control by printing money recklessly over a sustained period and then ramping it up massively during the pandemic, and then thinking they could get away with that and there wouldn't be any inflation and it was all just a transient thing. They've been wholly incompetent. So those are the people we have to blame about it. And inflation is totally corrosive in society, and it leads to exactly this sort of... It destroys people's incomes, it creates uncertainty, it stops people knowing... companies being able to price goods and services in a way that allows them to plan, and it causes this sort of anxiety, which is sometimes might be justified, but in a competitive market that shouldn't matter. In other cases where there's less competition, like you can't switch your mobile provider every month, you know, because you get into a total mess over it. I mean, I couldn't. I mean, you know, maybe some people can.
That's the case.
Then it's more problematic.
Yeah. Competition obviously allows prices to reduce mostly, but obviously not in
And inflation allows all sorts of strange and disruptive things to go on.
Exactly. We have to come back to this, but Just Stop Oil. We have to go to Just Stop Oil now because they have been met with a peaceful counter-protest today. But are they becoming a danger to themselves? I think it's clear they are.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dewbs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my new show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m, where real people get to meet those in power and hold them to account. Every week, we'll be hearing your views from up and down the country in the real world. Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it. So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Dewbs & Co with me, Emily Carver. Keeping me company tonight is Daniel Moylan, Conservative Life peer in the House of Lords, and Michael Walker, contributing editor at Novara Media. Thank you very much indeed. Just had a few emails about Asda, who's come under criticism from the Competition and Markets Authority for potentially profiteering with its fuel prices. Jill says, Asda were consistently the cheapest for fuel around here near Colchester. Well, go figure. And David says, why has Asda been singled out? Throughout, I found their prices often cheaper than other supermarkets. Well, that's a little bit confusing. But on Farage and that apology from NatWest CEO Alison Rose, Sid says, the wonderful and popular Nigel doesn't just need the bank apology, but the bank should reopen all of his accounts that have been closed and do the same for any other person they have done this to. Well, yes, a lot of people may well be contacting their banks to find out why exactly their account was closed. That's what Nigel Farage has been encouraging people to do if they suspect that perhaps their account was closed for other reasons than was said, or perhaps they never found out what the reasons were. That seems to be the case for some people. But moving on to our final story, Just Stop Oil protesters were met with a counter-protest this morning by a group called Just Stop Beeping Everyone Off. Is this the way to stop them, perhaps? Peaceful people power, or are the police not pulling their weight? There was also an incident where a Just Stop Oil protester got kicked in the head. Obviously, we should abhor violence in this form, but it does feel like a bit of a powder keg at the moment. Are Just Stop Oil beginning to endanger themselves, particularly when the public seem to be taking things into their own hands? Michael, what do you make of this, Just Stop Beeping us off group? I won't say what they are actually called.
Well, I suppose it depends if I saw that there was a ring around the Just Stop Oil protesters, so I suppose if they're not allowed to leave, does that count as kidnap? I'm not sure. I'm not an expert in the law here.
Can we get the video up again, if we can?
The question, I suppose, is are Just Stop Oil protesters putting themselves in danger, in harm's way? And I think they are. But I think, to be fair, credit where it's due, that shows just how much conviction they have. Like, I wouldn't necessarily myself stand in the road to stop cars for a variety of reasons, but you can't say these people are doing an easy thing, because what they are doing is subjecting themselves both to arrest, but also to vigilante violence, apparently, yesterday.
Well, yes, that was quite terrible to see, but as people can see on the screen there, those were the counter-protests encircling the Just Stop Oil protesters and preventing them from basically disrupting the traffic. And then here we have a man who is very angry indeed and brutalises this activist, kicking him straight in the head by the looks of things. It does look very dramatic indeed. Now, that is not the way to deal with activists, but I imagine there are a lot of people who are absolutely infuriated by being disrupted, Daniel. Is it surprising?
I want to draw attention to another fact.
I just thought you got a bit bored just having a look at your phone.
I'm looking up here. We have 3 by-elections today going on.
We do.
And there isn't a Just Stop Oil candidate in Uxbridge, where I've looked. There isn't and I imagine there isn't one in Selby and Somerton either. And we live in a democratic society. And why are they not putting their arguments in front of people at the polls so that people can vote for them? And then we can decide what level of support they've actually got.
That's a very good point, Daniel.
What they're trying to do is a tiny number of people who I think are nutty. I mean, I think they've become completely obsessed to the point of irrational behaviour. A tiny number of people trying to force their views on others. And I don't think that deserves praise for being brave. I think that is actually on the margins of rationality. And when we have here, we've got a tremendous opportunity. Count Binface has made the effort. He's out there. There is a Green Party. There's somebody who even thinks we might rejoin the EU.
I think I would say...
You can't say that.
You're probably going to break some electoral laws there.
Goodness me, I need to read them all out and get my producer to send me all the names.
Never be asked back now.
You'll never be asked back.
But, where are they? Where are they?
But anyway, Michael, just on that point, it is true that they could stand for election and make their voices heard, and no one really thinks it's that brave to walk slowly in front of traffic with your mates.
So I think what we should recognise is that in a liberal society there are many ways to try and influence the public debate other than standing for election. Of course, standing for election is one. There are ways that wealthy people do. So wealthy people put £20 million into venture capital into GBNews to try and take the conversation a little bit to the right. Just Stop Oil are getting in front of cars to try and get climate change up the political agenda. Now, I think it is worth mentioning on that point that we are currently living through the 2 hottest weeks on record. So
not in this country.
Well, across the world, right? So it's global warming, right? So you don't believe all of that. What does that mean?
I think those numbers.
I will just say to everyone that there is a large choice of candidates at the Uxbridge by-election, which I don't have time to read out just now. But you are about to have Nigel Farage with you. He is in... Where is he? I think he is in Wales, actually. Newport. He is in Newport for you. He'll be giving his take on that apology.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Jonathan Vautry here with your latest GB News weather forecast provided by the Met Office. A lucky few of us have managed to see some sunny spells throughout today, but there are still a few showers lingering on into the evening and into Friday as well, particularly for parts of Northern Ireland through Scotland as well. Also a few just clearing their way off the far southeast of England as well. In between that, we will start to see some clearer spells developing, and that will allow those temperatures to just slide off into single figures for particularly rural areas, particularly for parts of central Scotland. We could see close to 4 degrees Celsius, so a bit of a chill in the air first thing on Friday morning. That will allow for some sunshine, but there's also going to be the central area from Northern Ireland, southern Scotland down into Northern England, where it is rather cloudy from the word go, and that cloud will continue to push its way across the rest of England and Wales throughout the day. The risk of some scattered showers in there as well. More prolonged rain for parts of Northern Ireland. Underneath all that cloud, though, it is going to be a relatively cool day. Temperatures between 16 and 22 degrees Celsius. Into the weekend, something more widely unsettled will be developing as these frontal systems start pushing their way in from the Atlantic. Those isobars also squeezing together across the southern half of the UK, particularly southern coast of England. We'll see some very strong winds, coastal gales, perhaps possible later on Saturday. This accompanied by outbreaks of rain for the vast majority of us. The far north of Scotland getting away with the sunniest and driest start to the weekend, but there'll be further outbreaks of rain and showers as we head into Sunday and the start of next week as well. Bye-bye.
The temperature's rising. Boxed Solar, proud sponsors of weather on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we